Can you think of a good memory of summer from your childhood? I was thinking of one, and we had a grasshopper, as they would say, and biting into a peach. Just been picked from my grandfather's peach tree. If you've ever had that experience of just eating a freshly picked peach that's still a little bit warm, and it's tart, sweet, and the juice just runs stickily down your chin, it's just exhilarating. And I was thinking of that moment, looking at it through the eyes of an adult this time, and thinking about the work that went into my being able to taste the sweetness of that fruit. I thought about my grandfather decades before I was born, and the sweat that went into him digging with a shovel, with the work of his own body, digging a hole big enough to plant the root ball of that peach tree, covering it up, the discipline of making sure that it's watered, the skill of pruning it just right so that it could grow into a healthy tree, the patience of waiting season after season until it's finally bearing fruit. What about all those things, and then the work of going to get the ladder, climbing up the ladder in his advanced age, picking that peach and handing it to his little granddaughter. All the work that goes into just the experience of eating a peach. Thinking about that makes it even sweeter. Let us pray. God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. For freedom, Christ has set us free. Thinking about what freedom means. And sometimes when we use the word freedom, we use it in a sense that suggests just a complete absence of entanglements. You just put loose and fancy free, able to do whatever you want, not worried about relating to others or the impact that you might have on other people. Or freedom might be the absence of work and discipline. But that's not really the freedom that's being talked about here in Paul's letter to the Galatians. This kind of freedom instead is not an absence of entanglements and relationships. Instead, freedom is what makes those relationships life-giving rather than life-draining. Right? It's not an absence of work. It's what makes work joyful rather than sapping, rather than drudgery. It's what makes life sweet. So I want to say a little bit more about what freedom means in this sense, especially with the way Paul is talking about it in this letter. So one way that's really helpful to me to think about it is asking, who's in charge of me right now? Or what is in charge? So to use a really pretty clear example. So someone who's an alcoholic is never going to be free of the disease of alcoholism. Right? If someone's an alcoholic, they're always an alcoholic. But if they're in recovery, right, then the alcohol is no longer in charge. Instead, they've allowed a higher power to be in charge of them, rather than their addiction. So it's not a complete absence of this addiction that they have, but rather it's a freedom from it. It means that it's not in charge of them anymore. Does that make sense? Good, because it's important to understand this when we ask a couple other questions about what freedom means. And this, especially as it relates to this passage. So freedom is also asking the question, what's in charge, the flesh or the spirit? All right, this is tricky, because I think we're really tempted to look at this question through our own lenses, and those are post-Enlightenment, 21st century Western lenses. That's the way that we see things. And we've sort of been brought up to think that spirit and body are two separate, dueling things. Right? That there's a separation of mind and body. And that flesh is bad, and that the spirit is good. The spirit is somehow higher, and the flesh is lower. Gosh, that's not a worldview that's unique to us. Even in the early days of Christianity, there was what was called the Manichaean branch of Christianity. And they really believed anything material, anything in the flesh was bad, and that it was almost illusory in nature. It's almost an illusion. That is not how Paul understands flesh and spirit. Not at all. He doesn't think that our spiritual selves and our bodily selves are two separate, warring things. Right? He doesn't think that mind and body, or spirit and body, are separate. Right? He sees them as one complete entity. That was the only way that he could understand flesh and spirit. So I can't emphasize that enough. He's not seeing them as in dualistic terms. So what exactly is he talking about when he says, don't be driven by the flesh, instead be led by the spirit? When he says flesh there, it's shorthand for letting the desires of the flesh dictate you. Right? He understands that we all have animal instincts, that we can all be selfish or greedy or get defensive or even get violent, or that we just want to satisfy our urges. And what Paul says is it's not the desire itself that's bad, it's when the desire gets out of balance. Okay? So for example, if you have a desire for intimacy, if that desire can become sort of out of balance, then it would become the first on his list here, fornication, which he understands as a sexual act that lacks respect for the other person, that lacks commitment to the other person. So it's more just gratifying your own desires. Or a desire to experience the divine, to experience God. If that gets out of balance, you can be tempted into idolatry. A desire for joy, if it becomes out of balance, can become carousing and drunkenness. A desire for justice and for right relationships. If it's out of balance, it can become anger, misguided anger, out of proportion anger. And so when Paul says don't be guided by the flesh, that's what he's talking about. He says don't let these desires that we all have get out of whack. Don't let them be in charge. Instead, live by the Spirit, which for him incorporates the flesh too. It's just that you're able to recognize when a desire is about to get out of control and you put the brakes on it. Right? It's being able to just exercise our higher thinking capacities that we have as human beings. This example might be helpful. In our house, we have something that actually Kaylee came up with this phrase. She calls it bad brain. So it's like when you just have an instinct to judge someone, or to say something angry, or to just say something immature. Right? If you can just catch it and say to yourself, oh, bad brain, and then not say it. That's a perfect example of living by the Spirit rather than by the flesh. So who's in charge? Another question is, who's in charge, self or community? Are you being guided by your own self-interest? Are you being guided by the interest of the common good, of the greater whole? He warns the Galatians. They're kind of having a tough time figuring out how to be in community together and what to do with this newfound freedom, the gospel that they have. And he says, if you bite and devour one another, take care that you're not consumed by one another. I thought, what would that look like in our own context? Bite and devour one another. That's such a strong image, don't you think? So I thought of something that Leanne researched a couple months ago, speaking about human trafficking. And she guided us all to a website where you could go and discover how many enslaved people actually support your lifestyle. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you remember that average of... What?
I think it was 200.
Yeah, something like that. Something like that.
Each person is different, but...
Yeah, it's different for different people. But, so we might think, oh, we have such freedom, this lifestyle that we have in North America. We can get anything we want to eat, anytime. We've got all these possessions that make life really convenient and easy, and what freedom there is in that. But if we want to be people of faith, we're obliged to stop and ask ourselves, at what cost? What impact does our lifestyle have on the greater good? Another great I love a road trip. Anybody else? Yeah. It's great. There's freedom, you know, in just getting behind the wheel of a car and going where you want to go. I don't want to ruin road trips for you, okay? But I just encourage you to ask questions like these, if not this exact question. But, you know, think about our cars and think about the effect that they have on our climate, on our environment. And so this freedom that we're enjoying, being able to go wherever we want, anytime we want to, at what cost to future generations who are going to be around much longer than we are and are going to have to clean up our mess. And there's a quote that I love from Martin Luther King. It says that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So that we're all tied together. If we're letting our own self-interest be in charge, rather than a community interest be in charge, then we're not living by the Spirit. We're not living in the way that God wants us to live.